Yo, what up, everybody? Welcome back to the Texas Football Orange Bloods YouTube channel. I think I said that right. I mean, who knows? Whatever.
I think you got all the words in there.
On today's video, we're going to be getting an update on Jared Verse, who has like 30 offers out of Albany. And then also let's talk about guys in the portal that maybe have or have not yet been offered or interest from Texas yet. So Geoff Ketchum, Ari Temkin, make sure to like the video. Like it, just give it a thumbs up. I beg of you, give it a thumbs up, and post your comments and questions about other guys in the portal. Maybe there's like Catch. I think I saw that there's like 27% of the kids that have entered the portal have found new homes already. So we'll see over years how the portal changes based on information that becomes available on trends and stuff. But a lot of kids available in the portal. So if you have any names you want us to talk about or questions you have, make sure to post those in the comments. Also subscribe to the channel. But Catch, let's start with Verse, very talented linebacker out of Albany, who I think I read he has like 30 offers here. I mean, basically everybody's offered him.
Yeah, everybody's offered him in part because he plays at a position where there are so few people available to upgrade programs. So pass rush help. One of the things that makes him unique, he's 6'4", 250 out of Albany, but he has 3 years of eligibility remaining. So you're getting a guy that's got some chops. He's been an All-America level player at his level, and he still has a lot of football to play. So in a weird way, he's worth his weight in gold. And yeah, he's got offers from, I wouldn't say a who's who of college football because he's not Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia level, but I would say amongst the second-class schools in college football, the non-annual playoff level teams, he's certainly been probably the most highly recruited player in the
portal. Because of that fact that maybe Texas isn't competing with the top dogs in recruiting, that they have a leg up here because it's Florida State's obviously been on him from the start, and they've, as you mentioned in previous videos, been really well in the portal. Like, who's their biggest competition, or where's an advantage here versus where else he's getting offers?
I think the disadvantage that Texas has is that this is a kid that wants to, he literally said in an interview with our Florida State site in the Rivals Network today that he wants to have a decision by the end of December, early January at the latest. This is a guy that he wants to be somewhere in the spring. So he entered the portal in the first week of December, and the schools that were on him like stink on you know what were the likes of Florida State and Tennessee, able to get him in for an official visit before the dead period started on December 15th. It might be that he doesn't take any other visits before he makes a decision. And that makes the schools that were able to get him on campus before December 15th kicked in, that puts them at a much greater advantage than Texas, who has offered. But weirdly, even though they're just a couple of weeks behind, which in recruiting typically at the high school level isn't that big of a deal. Guys get hot, their stock takes off. Some teams offer earlier than others. When you offer in the portal is really critical when it comes to guys at this time of the year that want to be enrolled at whatever school they pick in January. The disadvantage that Texas, I think, put itself under specifically with Verse is that, they only have so much time to make an impact before he makes a decision. And it will have been time spent with him that's far less than the schools. I think Florida and Tennessee are the top two schools with Verse right now.
What's your crystal ball on this?
I would say Florida State, based on the fact that it seems like they're obsessing over him. I mean, I'm seeing Florida State. They've had him on campus for a visit. They've told him he comes in day one starter. And there just seems to be an obsession around the media following Verse that's different than every other school in the country. And sometimes that stuff doesn't make a big deal, but sometimes it accurately reflects the way a story is unfolding. And the fact that he's already been there, I don't want to say he's a Florida State lean, but my Spidey senses going off tell me that Florida State's probably the team to beat.
Well, how does he end up at Albany?
I don't know his story well enough to know. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he's a Western. So he comes out of Berwick, Pennsylvania. No stars, no recruiting ranking.
Wow.
I don't know anything about him other than all of college football missed on him.
Yeah.
He goes to Albany, and very quickly, I think this is the really unique thing about him, is that he doesn't play last year because of COVID. So he's a class of 2019 kid that nobody knows about, right? I mean, he goes to Albany, but I don't see any other offers. He's 6'4", 250. He redshirts in 2019 and then doesn't play in 2020 because of COVID. So he's a third-year redshirt freshman this year and still has 3 years of eligibility. But, he's unique in the sense that it's pretty rare when we talk about a third-year redshirt freshman. He might be 21, but he's playing with the eligibility of a 19-year-old. And
wait, so this is his first year playing?
Yes.
And doesn't he get an extra year? Doesn't he have 4 years then?
No, he's got 3. So
he doesn't get the extra year though? Because
he didn't play. He just zeroed it in 2020.
Okay, yeah.
So
wow.
He doesn't get an extra year because they didn't play. So that year doesn't count against him. It's not like you got 5 years to play for and the clock starts.
Right.
He doesn't get punished because of that.
But still, 3 years is, if this guy is, what
otherwise he would have been a redshirt sophomore with 2 years to play. And then he would have had a COVID year at the back end of it if he wanted it.
I'd say based on this guy's trajectory, it'd be shocked for him to play 3 more years of college football anyways.
Well, I think it would be disappointing, right? Because you're recruiting him now thinking that he's an instant starter. Truth of the matter is he shows up draft eligible after this year. I mean, he's draft eligible this year.
Right.
So he has 3 years of eligibility remaining. It's hard to know exactly what you're getting with him. I think the thing that stands out the most to me is the size. 6'4", 250 means he's not a tweener, which a lot of times when you find guys at this level of football that we're talking about, he's in the Colonial Conference. Typically if you're looking at a guy with numbers, it's like, well, what's the holdup there? And you're like, oh, he's 6'1", 215.
Right.
And you go, okay, I get it. That this kid is 6'4", 250. My guess is that he just wasn't 6'4", 250.
Right.
When he was in high school. He might have been 6'2", 210.
Right.
And 3 years later, he's a big boy. What's interesting is it looks like he went to I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong profile. I was going to say, it looks like he went to a Rivals camp. He did not. If you go to his Rivals bio from 2019, he has a blank space in his picture.
Well, just goes to show you a lot of different factors that go into it. And obviously there's, there are a lot more hits in terms of the recruiting rankings, but there's definitely some misses for sure. Guys fall through the cracks. All right. So what else are you hearing, Catch, then in terms of the portal, with Watts already in the fold, obviously Ewers, and we know the offer is there for Verse. So clearly there's a plan here.
I think the profile for who Texas is going to continue to look after is former Texas, and Verse doesn't fit this profile, but Watts and Quinn Ewers do. You're talking, although not necessarily for the size of the school. You're looking for a guy who is from the state of Texas originally. I think Texas, more times than not, the guys that they land in the portal are going to be players that have high school experience in the state of Texas. It just makes sense that you treat the rest of college football, these next tiers below you, as a minor league of sorts, and let them figure out who amongst the 2 stars is good enough to play. And then when they hit, you raid them. Like that, I think, is the new age in college football. I think UT's latest offer is a prime example of this. You got a kid from Wyoming, wide receiver by the name of Isaiah Neyor. Really, I can't say that I know a ton about him prior to his entering the portal, but he was one of the best players in his conference this year for Wyoming. He had 878 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaged 20 yards per reception, which is pretty insane. I mean, that's a big play weapon. He played in an offense that was a run first, run second attack, and yet found a way, as basically the only receiving option for Wyoming, to be a big touchdown generator, a big play generator. he enters the portal, and he's from Arlington Lamar High School, former 2-star player, goes to Wyoming, couple of years there, kind of explodes in an offense that's not designed to have a receiver explode. And now that he's in the portal, if you're Texas, you know he's college good. You know that in taking him, part of the guesswork about him as a college football player is taken out of the equation. He can play. The fact that he's from the state of Texas, probably wants to come closer to home, play on for a program with a better platform. Your competition there might be somebody like TCU.
Plus, he played pretty reputable high school football at Lamar High School for sure.
Yes. And it sounds like, from learning a little bit about the guy, in his case, sounds like he really didn't play football until his senior year in high school. So he basically is a guy that showed up late on the radar of college schools, because most schools have already got their recruiting classes done by the time he was finally getting on the field to show people what he can do. And oftentimes you're left with the likes of Wyoming combing through the Metroplex, trying to find guys that have some upside. He was a pure track guy. One of the things that I like about him is I think he's got, when he was in high school, it turns out he had one of the better prep triple jumps in the country as a senior. So he's a good athlete. And
I think we both agree. I mean, and it's obvious they could just stack up wide receivers. In terms of the numbers we're trying to manage here, like the fact that you're saying they're in on a receiver already and a kid from Texas, like that's huge. Another guy that I really like is Jacob Cowing. Who's out of UTEP. He was a former 2-star, another one of these kids that fell through the cracks. Now he's from Arizona. But he's in terms of the kid from Wyoming you're talking about, it seems like he's more green. Whereas like this dude, Cowing he's 5'11", 170, but he plays much bigger than his size. Like he plays outside, he plays inside, which you got to love. And he's a great route runner. He's just a smart, experienced player. He's eighth. He was averaging 20 yards of reception last year for UTEP's offense on 69 receptions. So he's big time playmaker, and he's just so versatile. But look, hopefully they're in on multiple receivers, quite frankly, in terms of the portal, because I think when you sort of look at the numbers, and we've talked about that over the last, few weeks, and as we continue to talk about the portal here throughout the offseason, wide receiver is certainly a position to prioritize, right?
Yeah, they got to have somebody on the outside opposite Xavier Worthy. When you look at it at the end of that, so that starts out as Joshua Moore's job. Then he was inconsistent and really wasn't performing at the level that I think they had hoped that under Steve Sarkisian that he would. Then he kind of, his career stalls out. He leaves the program. We'll just leave it at that. His replacement at that point becomes Marcus Washington, who's the best blocking wide receiver on the roster. So Marcus Washington played a lot of football even before Joshua Moore was gone, but he's not a guy that was productive in the passing game. And Texas found itself with Jordan Whittington hurt. It found themselves in a position when Xavier Worthy got bottled up a little bit at various times towards the end of the season. There wasn't anybody that they could absolutely
That's
count
what,
on.
in Sark's off, they need to just stack playmakers like that. You look at the Alabamas and Oklahoma States, they're just stacking wide receivers. The Ohio State wide receiving core, that's, even though they're not playing for a title like that, they're going to have like 3 or 4 guys drafted. Olave and Garrett Wilson are probably both first-round picks at wide receiver this year.
No doubt about it. And I think that, when you look at the recruiting class that they've signed at wide receiver this year, Brennan Thompson is probably one of the most exciting guys in this class. He's a slot receiver, which means he'll be battling Jordan Whittington for playing time coming into next season. They didn't fill that outside receiving spot. So if they don't get help from the portal, they're going right back to the guys that they were leaning on a year ago that just didn't perform well enough. So I think there's a sense of urgency. We know that they have interest in Jacob Cowing because half the staff, including Steve Sarkisian, is following him on social media. They're kicking the tires there. The fact that they've already offered this kid from Wyoming, again, his name is Isaiah Neyor. It may mean that they either prioritize him over Cowing, or maybe Cowing is showing indications that he has other options that he's more interested in. I don't know that it matters, but we know that they're showing interest, and that's a little different. And they're offering kids, which is a little different than say the offensive line position, where they've signed 6 high school kids. They'll make it 7 if they can land Devon Campbell. It remains to be seen how much even 5-star offensive linemen can impact the offensive line immediately.
I mean, do you think they still should be? I mean, I know what you've talked about in terms of like right now they're managing the portal on the offensive line. They're waiting for Campbell, and they want to have spots open so that they're not like, oh no, we're not ready. We can't take anymore. I mean, do you think that's the right move?
There's a kid out of Western Kentucky that you and I are both fans of. His name is Mason Brooks.
Yep.
He's a 2-time all-conference right tackle for Western Kentucky from Cedar Park High School.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's literally a stone's throw away from the stadium. And to me, this is the guy, this is the kind of profile. If you're Texas, it's what we were just talking about. He's a guy that minimally recruited in high school. He goes off to college and grows up. And suddenly we're talking about a kid who, if I'm not mistaken, is 6'7", 320 pounds.
Yeah. He grew a lot. And I mean, he also coming out, I think was very undersized. I don't think it was like 250 coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Texas is allowed to, they let him go to Western Kentucky. Let them put the sweat equity in.
This is what a lot of people feared about the transfer portal, was the development at some schools and then go to the big. I mean, it's a two-way street, honestly. Like the people that complain about it, like guys that don't develop will go the opposite way. But totally, this is exactly.
In theory, Western Kentucky could replace him with a failed 4-star from Florida State. You know what I mean?
And he's basically a 3-year starter, because even as a true freshman, he played a lot because of an injury, and he has 2 years of eligibility left.
Correct.
So, yeah, I mean, do you think tackle is if you were to say, let's just say from a numbers perspective, they're waiting on Campbell and maybe a few others in terms of the high school recruiting, like if you were to prioritize one for the portal on the offensive line, would it be tackle or guard?
Tackle. Both, I don't know. This kid probably can't play left tackle. Otherwise he'd have been doing it for Western Kentucky.
Right.
And that's the position where Texas is barest at. I mean, It's Christian Jones, or maybe maybe you're leaning on a Kelvin Banks. And the thing is, I'm not convinced. Some people think Kelvin Banks is absolutely a tackle. I don't think it's out of the question. I just don't watch Kelvin Banks and think to myself, highest end of the highest end left tackles. And I think he's a guy that can play either of the 2 interior guard spots or right tackle, at which case he could come in and conceivably this Mason Brooks kid is in competition with Kelvin Banks for playing time. But I don't find that problematic. Right. If Kelvin Banks is good enough to beat a 2-time all-conference USA player out from Jump Street.
And Western Kentucky had the most prolific offense in college football history last year, because Zappe, their quarterback, broke the Joe Burrow touchdown record and the yardage record. So, I mean, it's the most prolific offense in the history of college football that he was at the right tackle for.
And this guy was like the linchpin on the offensive line for them. If Banks ends up being that good, that's a good problem to have. That means you're able to do with Mason Brooks at that point. Maybe you slide him into guard, and maybe your right tackle at Western Kentucky is an interior player for you at Texas, but at 6'7", 320, he's got the size that Texas covets.
Yeah.
More times than not, when the kids are coming out of the Western Kentuckys or even the Albanys of the world, like we're talking with Jared Verse, on the offensive line, they're smallish guys. They're smallish, but good players. That's not this guy. This guy's legitimately a physical monster, but Texas has shown, and they haven't hid this at all, they prefer the high school offensive lineman right now. And the thing that's just curious about that for me is that Mason Brooks is a plug and play player for anybody that signs him. You sign that guy specifically for a spot. My problem with the approach that Texas is taking is that they went 5-7 a year ago, and that I'm all for building with war daddies on there's nobody that Texas has taken along the offensive line in the last month and a half that I would say you don't take. But I don't know how fair it is to ask those guys the best offensive lineman that Texas have ever had in school history. 75% of them redshirted. And it's still, at Alabama, it's still the preference.
Right.
At Georgia, it's still the preference. It's asking a lot. Even 5-star offensive linemen at 18 years old to come in and be ready immediately. And if Texas can't get that, which I just don't know how fair that is to expect, you run the risk of being in the exact same position that you were in a year ago while waiting for kids to grow up. And look, they'll be okay by 2024, but they've got to find a way to bridge the gap from 2022 to 2024 without playing at a level of football that could potentially get your coach fired.
Well, and the big thing about Georgia and Alabama is the depth that they have the luxury to, that's what you want to establish at Texas, is basically like just shuttling guys on the offensive line and redshirting them. I will say, and I do think they need to add experience at right tackle. Mason Brooks is perfect. I mean, he's absolutely perfect, especially considering he's from Cedar Park. What I will say, at the very least, at least there you're potentially talking about some 5-star offensive linemen with a experienced center. Remember, your center is setting the protections. So, you're better set up to have, if you've got to now have a brand new center, let's say one of these guys is ready to start at center, it's a different story. But with Majors back, I think that helps a lot because he does a lot of the organization stuff that's better with experience. Whereas it's like, all right, yeah, you just be big and shuffle your feet, you know what I mean? Like, and use your hands like that. I mean, it's just, I think it's easier in that way. Look, again, preferable for experience. And again, Brooks is perfect, but at least, at the very least, you have an experienced center there to kind of play off of that can anchor that line.
Consequently, look, Jake Majors has had to grow up on the fly. He has not been a plus player yet in college. But he's getting ready to hit that part of his career where you would expect the light switch to go on. That's a little bit my concern. Like, my concerns, I think everybody understands, they've watched Jake Majors the last 2 years and they can see a player getting better who's going to be a plus player.
But he's just been on some bad offensive lines.
And you've had to live with what it means to have either a freshman or a true sophomore as the anchor of your offensive line. Right. It's a hell. If Kelvin Banks is your starting left tackle next year as an 18-year-old freshman, and you're telling him sink or swim, we've got no other options. That's potentially a dangerous game to play with Quinn Ewers as your most important player in the program.
Yep.
So I get this. I get what they're doing. And I guess I'll end it with this. What Sarkisian's doing along the offensive line is, I think, the most traditional approach in a big time program. I don't think there's an urgency with guys in the portal right now along the offensive line that, I think they're going to try and build it with these young guys. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means immediately for 2022, when I know everybody is high on this recruiting class. You can't hover around 500 next year and think that there won't be damage to the program. My fear for Sarkisian in general is that if he doesn't do well enough in 2022, he's officially on a bit of a hot seat in 2023. It's like, let's say he goes 7-5, right? Well, then he's a 500 coach in 2 seasons. That's not what he was hired to do. And I think there's this urgency of, okay, well, he better do it in 2023, or how Texas fans are. Like, I think that will be the sentiment.
You almost get to like double-digit win expectations then in 2023.
And I think high school kids would wait. They'd say, well, we want to see. They were already doing that to Texas this year.
Right.
They'll say, we want to wait and see it. And if they don't see it, it really puts Texas behind the 8 ball. It's exactly what ultimately, it's the thing that got Tom Herman fired. They knew Tom Herman was doing a decent enough job, but recruiting started to go off the rails, and wisely they made the change, because you got a top 5 class now as a byproduct that you wouldn't otherwise have if Herman had stayed. The same thing happened to Charlie Strong going into his 3rd year. After back-to-back top 5 classes, it froze up in year 3 as everybody was like, I'm tired of hearing it. I want to see it. There's just, there's a protection to Sark that I don't know that Sark has an urgency for, which is you're coaching for 2023, truly, because Quinn Ewers' his last year in Texas may be 2023. So
Hopefully.
the run-up is is Xavier Worthy's last season. So it's a big deal, but you can't be so aloof to the record in 2022 that the stakes of 2023 are higher than you can control. Because I think in general, everybody associated with the program would say, look, by year 3, Sarkisian's got to be winning double-digit games, or what are we doing? If your first 2 years are so abject that people are thirsting for success and you miss that window, even what if he goes 5-7, 7-5, 9-4?
Oh, and by the way, there's a pretty good chance 2023 is in a different conference.
Maybe. Yeah. And that's another elephant in the room,
right?
Which is, we know Texas isn't ready for the SEC. There's a little bit of how long, let me put it to you like this. How long, and we can end it like this. Maybe we're getting into 2 video sex like now, but because this is a little bit of a different conversation. But when Texas goes into the SEC, how many years do we think it's going to take in that conference before Texas is a legitimate conference championship contender?
Well, so much of that just depends on how they put these pods or whatever together. Because I mean, the way that they set up their divisions, like some teams get screwed where it's like, because you have the current setup, some of these teams aren't playing, they're playing once every 7, 8, 9 years. So if you get, I mean, and they're clearly going to get probably A&M, I would imagine, in the same pod. So
probably Arkansas, maybe Missouri.
Maybe they'll catch a break with the pod and they'll get, but I don't think they will, because they're going to be a premier crossover game. So they're going to want them to have premier, You're
probably going to be playing a Florida and a Georgia and an Alabama during the regular season, in addition to the other games that in your schedule once a year.
Right.
I think most people, I think it's fair to assume at a minimum it's going to take 2 or 3 years.
Yep.
I mean, that's not crazy talk. That is a 5-7. It may take Oklahoma 2 or 3 years.
It starts up front, and it's stacking classes together like Georgia and Alabama do with 5 and 4-star offensive linemen. And that way because you're right. Like these kids have the physical maturity from senior year of high school that they have all over the course of their freshman year. Like ideally you do get these guys redshirting because they get through that physical maturity that first year. And then this is the Jake Majors part of it, where it's like, okay, you got 3 years of the physical training now, or 2 years of the physical training now. You should be body style as full as you're going to be. And that's 100% what it's all about. It's these guys, Kelvin Banks, it's a lot to ask for him. Forget about the inexperience. It's from a physical body standpoint. It's so difficult. And that's what separates Alabama and Georgia, is they're always just physically at another level on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And they just stack 4- and 5-star kids at the offensive and defensive lines on top of each other.
I think you go get a Mason Brooks, because he immediately upgrades your roster this year. Yeah. And he just gives you some insurance to let some of these guys grow up at a pace that's not rushed.
Yep.
Putting a guy on the field out of your own team desperation is part of how Texas keeps ending up here. Look, Hudson Card's career at Texas is somewhat destroyed because they had to have him be the starting quarterback as a redshirt freshman.
You can't bring this up, Catch. People are mad about that.
It's the easiest one, though. It's the easiest one because you've just got positions all over the field, right, where Texas's needs are impacting the developmental pace that these kids are going in. The most valuable commodities in this program, some of them are the offensive linemen that Texas has taken in this recruiting class. And to protect that asset by bringing in somebody that allows you to potentially just take your time if needed, as opposed to the if needed thing is out the door if you don't, is where I'm coming from on this. But I think Sarkisian's instincts and and the coaches felt this way a year ago, they'll find a way as coaches to make this work. That strategy led to 5-7 in year one, and they were totally wrong about what they would get out of that offensive line.
Yep.
Repeating that mistake again by not taking advantage of, this is a kid from Cedar Park we're talking about. Like, you know, this should be shooting from the layup line.
Right.
And if they decide in March or April after spring ball that, oh, we screwed up, we need to go out and get somebody like that, the lack of urgency may end up being something that they have to learn from the hard way. And you and I may be doing videos in 2022 where we're talking about going into the 2023 season. Will they change it up, you know, after having not more proactive, done so for the first couple of years? This is such a new thing. You know, you and I 2 years ago weren't doing portal videos.
Right.
It's so new. I think Texas is unlike a Michigan State or Florida State, who are at the front end of the portal experimentation. Texas seems to be in the middle. They're not ignoring the portal, but they seem to not have exactly the plan for what to do with the portal. And they've got to figure that out, because this is going to be like anything else in college athletics or any other walk of life. If you're going to do it great. If you don't, you're going to lose to those who are doing it great.
Yep.
And just being okay isn't going to be the thing that gets you over the hump at a school like the University of Texas.
That's Catch. I'm Ari. We're with orangebloods.com. And of course, if you've been watching this long, what are you doing? What are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the channel.
Right there.
Right there.
It's like right below. I can't tell, but it's below one of us. It's below one of the dudes in the blue shirts. Just click it. For God's sakes. Don't make it big.
Subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you very, very soon. Peace.